Hey Soulcon Brotherhood, how you doing today? It is Russell Gray, also known yet as The Beard. I'm here to bring you another installment on the fitness series for the Soulcon community. Today I want to go over, talk a little bit about heart rate. It was actually interesting. A couple weeks ago we were up at Mitch Park and somebody mentioned something about max heart rate and training heart rate, and so I wanted to devote a little bit of time around that. So first off, what a lot of people say, why would I want to train my heart rate just on a very basic level? And it's because the ability for your heart to pump blood into your body and your muscles and actually facilitate the exchange of nutrients into the muscles is what keeps you going during your exercise. I think everyone's pretty aware of that on a basic level. And you realize when you go out for a run or do something, you go out cycling or something, your heart rate increases is because of that nutrient exchange and in the muscles that requires food and oxygen. So obviously that's why it's important to think about heart rate. There's a couple, nowadays there's actually quite a few different devices out there. I'm not going to go into all the different ones that are out there on how to measure heart rate, but I do want to differentiate between two of them, two different types specifically. A lot of them will have a wrist device that actually uses sensors on the strap of the wrist to measure your heart rate. Not too bad, nowadays they're fairly accurate. Not the best, not the worst. They're good for, I would say, the very casual athlete or someone who's not looking to race or anything like that. If you're getting into more demanding races, or you're getting into more, I shouldn't say demanding races, but more demanding exercise, you want to race, you want to be competitive, your best bet is going to be to get one of the chest strapped mounts that actually uses electrical signals and picks them up straight from your heart versus doing anything with the pulse in your veins. So just the two differences there. Once again, wrist-based is good for everyday use, basic exercise, stuff like that. If you're going to be or want to be competitive in races, or you just want to go to that next level, you're going to want to invest in one of the chest-strapped heart rate monitors. So again, we're community men, so I'm only going to discuss heart rate for men. There are a couple different formulas for figuring out your max heart rate. One of them is just a really basic one that's been around for years. It is 220 minus your age. So for me, I am 55 years old now, minus 220, so I'd be down to 165, which you think about as one of those things. I haven't trained heart rate in many years, but I was sort of surprised by that because when I was doing all of my cardio and aerobic stuff, my max heart rate was always in the like 181. I think when I first started, it was at like 185. Your maximum heart rate does decrease with age, though. As you get older, your max does tend to come down. It depends on your conditioning, though. There's another formula out there called the Tanaka formula, which is actually 208 minus 0.7 times your age. And for me, that came up to 169.5. So a little bit higher heart rate for me using the Tanaka method. The absolute best way to get your maximum heart rate is for you to go out and actually test it, because these are just general against all people in the society, and everybody's going to vary depending on their genetics. So it's much more important for you to, if you're really interested, to go out and do a test. And that test is going to be very uncomfortable. Once again, you're trying to figure out your maximum heart rate. So what you're going to do is you're going to warm up, just really light jogging, something like that, just something that starts your heart rate going, get your blood flowing. And you're going to want to do that for 15 minutes. And then you're going to start into the phase where you're going to build up, and you're going to, at that point, go into a 5-minute interval, yes, 5-minute interval, where you're going to be pushing almost as hard as you can. You're really pushing up against that wall. The last 30 seconds of that 5-minute interval, like if you're running, it should be a full out sprint. It should be absolutely everything you have. And right before you stop, you should be wearing a heart rate monitor. Right before you stop, you should capture that heart rate, because that's going to be about as close as you can get to finding out what your maximum heart rate is. So once again, 15-minute warm-up, pretty dang intense 5-minute interval with an all-out sprint at the last 30 seconds. And that, like I said, in running, that's running as hard as you can go. In biking, that's biking as absolutely hard as you can go, out of the saddle, just hammering it. So, and I would recommend biking or running, either one of those, to do this heart rate check for, because all other sports are going to be a little bit more difficult to line that up. So I want to talk a little bit about heart rate zones at this point, and they're pretty basic. There's a real low level intensity, which is 50 to 60% of your maximum heart rate. And then they consider the 60 to 70% as your basic endurance. And a lot of people call this your optimal fat burning zone. And they say that because you're really not, you're in a position where you're not burning off a lot of your ATP, and you're able to convert fat into a fuel source. I'm going to come back to this just a little bit though, because there's a little bit of a misnomer about it being the best fat burning zone. The third zone is your 70 to 80% zone, and that is really where you're going to be improving your aerobic conditioning. So, calculate your maximum heart rate, and then exercise in that 70 to 80% zone, and your aerobic conditioning will continue to go up. Then you go into the 80 to 90% zone, and that's actually where you're conditioning your maximum performance capacity. So how long you can go to maximum capacity. And then finally, the 90 to 100% zone is where very fit athletes go to help develop speed. So when they've already developed a level of fitness where lower levels really aren't doing much more for them, this is where they have to train to really increase their speed, either in the biking, cycling, whatever the sport. It could even be swimming. I want to go back to the 60 to 7% zone. Like I said, a lot of people consider that the optimal fat burning zone. What I don't want you to be confused with is, while it's a great zone for optimizing fat burning, you will still burn more fat in the higher zones than you will in the 60 to 70. You just, as a percentage, burn more in the 60 to 60 to 70 range. But in the 70 to 80, if you figure out how much actual fat you burn, it's still more, because you're doing that much more exercise and your heart is working that much harder. So I hope that made sense. A lot of people get confused by that and think, oh my gosh, I can only exercise in that 60 to 70% zone to really burn fat. That's not true. It's just an optimal zone. So now I want to go into a little bit about what's happening in your body. Your body uses ATP, which is adenosine triphosphate, as a fuel in your body. Your muscles need that. In fact, ATP converts into ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, and energy. So that's what it breaks down to. ATP breaks down into ADP and energy. So a way to get ATP is needed. It's something you have to be able to produce that energy. So you have a very limited amount of that. So one of the other things that your body has in it is creatine phosphate. So when you make ADP and energy, you can then use creatine phosphate plus ADP to get ATP and just creatine. So I know this is a little confusing, but I just want to go through some of this so you understand some of the cycles that are happening in your body as we exercise and we try and push things. So your energy from this only lasts from like 1 to 8 seconds maximum. That's right, seconds, not minutes. This is seconds maximum. And then you have to go into other forms of fuel, be it fats or carbohydrates. And carbohydrates are preferred. Fats are very difficult for you to burn, but it's good for you to understand how to get into that burning of fats. So the carbs, though, are stored as glycogen in your liver and in your muscles. And so when you're exercising, they can then be used to create the ATP and everything as well. And that supply of glycogen will usually last you probably at a maximum of about 1 hour. So you're not going to be able to do a whole lot with it. And the carbs have to go through a couple steps to be turned into this energy. First off, you have glucose, which is carbohydrate sugar, basically sugar or carbohydrates turn into sugar, which is a glucose, and that's stored in your blood. And then you get ADP, remember the diphosphate, and that creates lactate and ATP. So now you see where we're sort of going with this on bringing some lactate into your muscles and this soreness that you guys feel after your workout. So then you have the ATP again, which is the fuel needed, and lactate. Well, now you have the lactate can combine with oxygen, and it can combine with ADP to create CO2, which you breathe out, ATP again for fuel, and water. So the important thing here is that you produce lactate on one step, and then you use that lactate on the second step of your energy production. So as a rule, your body will consume the lactate that it produces, and you really shouldn't get too sore. The problem is this second step gets overrun in many times because your body's gone past a point where it can't use all the lactate. So now you're having lactate build up in the bloodstream and in the muscles. So when that happens, you get lactic acid. Acidosis I think is what it's called technically, but lactic acid, and that's sort of what the soreness is. And there's a point when you're exercising. So if you have a vertical line, which is your intensity, and a horizontal line, which is your intensity, and a vertical line, which is your heart rate, there's a point where it goes at a steady state, even to both of them, basically at a 45 degree, and then it deflects. And that deflection is where you've started to produce more lactate than you can consume, and you get lactic acid in the muscles. Fortunately, there is a program called lactic threshold training where as you exercise, you can move the point of deflection between your intensity and your heart rate. So what you want to do goes back to having your heart rate monitor. You want to figure out what that deflection point is, and I'm not going to go into that today because there's a lot of science around that. But if you actually look up training lactic threshold training on the internet, you'll find a lot of articles around where should I be from a heart rate, how do I find out what my deflection point is, and then you want to train within like 10 beats of that on your heart rate monitor below that. And as you do that, you'll find that your intensity will continue to go up and your heart rate will actually stay the same a lot of times, but it changes the deflection point. So the great thing about that is you can actually race harder and faster at the same heart rate without triggering lactic buildup in your muscles, which is going to make it so that you can't run or swim or bike as hard as you used to. So anyway, I hope you liked the video. Please comment below if you have any questions. I do want to, this is a book that I've had for years, Training Lactate Pulse Rate. It's an old book by Peter Jansen. I don't know if you can find it anymore, but I do know there's plenty of articles out there on the internet around training lactate threshold. And so if you get serious about running and you really want to figure out, how do I not get sore a lot, this is a way, and continue to get faster, this is a way to do that. So again, Please like the video, please comment on it, and if you have any other things that you'd like for us to discuss, please let me know, and I'd love to do it. God bless you all. Love you. Have a great day. Thank you.